everybody, today we're going to be working on our April tiling scene from Kimberbell's Home Sewn Volume 1. There's two previous videos on my channel about Home Sewn. One is going through the products involved with Home Sewn, and another was a video where I walked through selecting all of my fabrics and my threads, talked a little bit about felts and embellishments. So if you haven't seen those, give those a watch. I'll make sure they're linked below. We'll be working our way through all three of these, but one at a time. It's early in March right now, so I'm going to film the April one, and then when we get to April, I'll film for May, and then in May, I'll film for June. I'll do one of these per month, but we'll make sure we have it done in time to display for that month. For each of the tiling scenes, I will go ahead and film a video showing pulling fabric, as well as pulling coordinating threads that go with the fabrics that I've chosen. I did show the threads in a previous video, but here's a quick screenshot. I'm working with Floriani and Simthread brand threads. I have the linen color on my machine right now because we're going to start with that. In addition to all your threads, you want to make sure you've got your double curved applique scissors, your snips, paper tape. I've got everything in a fabric wrapped rope bowl. I have a video on my channel showing how to make this rope bowl. It's got an embroidered base. I'll link that below. This project is 5x7 hoop friendly. I have a couple 5x7 hoops, so I've already loaded two with my stabilizer, so I'm ready to get started. For my batting, I'm using Missouri Star 80/20 Best Blend batting. It's very similar to Kimberbell Project batting. It's really flat. Very good for embroidery. And for my fusible backing, I have some Pellon SF101. I do have Kimberbell Project batting and fusible backing, but not enough to get through this for the entire year. And there's another Kimberbell project coming up that I'm kind of holding the project batting and the backing for. You'll see that probably within the next month or so. If you look at the instructions for the April tiling scene, it starts us out on tile number 5. I'm going to start on tile number 1, and we'll go 1 through 6. We'll go beginning to end. We'll make all the tiles together, then we'll sew everything together, put on our backing, binding, and the hanging sleeve. Let's head over to the machine. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. I have my files on USB, my instructions on my folding metal book stand. If you've got the Home Sewn needle minder magnet, this is great if you're using a metal book stand. Let's get started and load the tile 1. We're starting with April, and we're going to go 1 through 6. Let's start with number 1. There's only one file to load for each tile number. Set embroidery, we're ready to go. I have the linen color on my machine. We're going to start with our batting placement line. For this first tile, I'm going to go through the first few steps really slow, and then for the tiles after that, I'll run some of them together because we're going to do the same thing over and over. Once your placement line is stitched, you want to cover that with your project batting. I've got a piece of tape here at the top. Make sure that's covered, and then you're going to stitch the tack down line. Next, you want to trim the batting that's outside of the tack down line. If you happen to cut your stabilizer at any point during your project, put some paper tape underneath it. Use your hand to support, make sure it's nice and secure, and then you can keep going with your project. Once that's trimmed, we're going to stitch out the background placement line and the seam line. Once that's stitched out, we're going to cover placement line with our fabric. The piece of fabric is more than big enough to actually cover probably almost the entire hoop. So you don't have to worry about which line is which if this is your first project and you've cut your fabric according to the directions. In fact, I can tape mine right here at the top and actually tape it to the top of my hoop. I'm going to put that back on the machine. Make sure it's right side up. And also, if you're using a light colored fabric, you can check underneath, check your batting, make sure there's no, dog hair, cat hair, black string, dark string, anything that's going to show through. Then we're going to stitch the background, tack down, and trimming line. The instructions say we can remove the tape. My piece of fabric is taped way at the top, right onto my hoop. It's not going to interfere with any of the quilting. I'm just going to leave it and take it off at the end. We're going to stitch out our background quilting detail. The quilting is done. We're going to stitch out the roof placement line. You want to grab your roof 1 fabric. This is the piece that's cut 2x7. You've got your roof placement line here. We want to make sure we cover that placement line with the roof 1 fabric. Make sure it's completely covered. I'm going to add a piece of tape, and then we're going to stitch the roof tack down line. Our roof fabric is tacked down. What you want to do is trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. So you're going to leave this part, that's our roof. That's all trimmed. I'm going to put my hoop back on the machine and we're going to stitch our chimney placement line. Grab your chimney 1 fabric. It's the piece that's 2 by 2.5. Cover the line just like before. Cover that placement line. Add a piece of tape. Stitch the tack down and then trim everything that's outside the tack down line. Everything is trimmed. It already looks cute. Let's get that back on our machine. We're going to change our thread color. You want to switch to cool gray. The color I'm using for that is this color of Floriani. Get that on your machine and we're going to stitch out the cloud placement line. Grab your cloud 1 fabric. This is the piece that measures 2 by 3.5. You have a cloud 1 and a cloud 2. It's the small piece. Make sure to cover those placement lines. Tape it in place, stitch out the tack down, and then trim. Once that's trimmed, you can stitch your cloud decorative outline. We're going to switch to the color Buttermilk and stitch out the roof satin outline and detail. We're going to switch back to cool gray. We're going to stitch the chimney satin outline. Color shadow. I accidentally pulled black instead, so make sure you're switching to the color shadow per the instructions. The chimney cap fill. Next we're going to switch to lead gray. We're going to stitch out the bricks fill. Next we're going to switch to magic mint. I'm actually using a light blue instead. We're going to stitch out the raindrops. That's it for tile number 1. Let's have a look at it. Really cute. Everything's stitched out really nice. We've got our chimney, our roof, the cloud with the detail, the little raindrops, background quilting. I'm going to set this aside and get my other hoop, which already has some stabilizer in it. So get your project out of your hoop, or if you're working with 2 5x7 hoops, go ahead, grab it, load your stabilizer. We're going to start on tile number 2. We'll trim everything at the end. Let's load our file for tile number 2. You want your linen color on your machine. The beginning steps are exactly the same. We're going to do the batting placement, batting, tack down, trim our batting, background placement line and seam line, place our background fabric right side up, then we'll stitch the tack down, remove the tape if you need to, and stitch out the quilting. I'm going to go ahead and run all of that together. It's exactly like we just did. Make sure you've got that linen color on your machine. Let's get started on tile number 2. Once you've done all your steps and gotten through your background quilting, we're going to start with the roof placement line. You want to grab your roof 2 fabric, that's the small piece that's 2 by 2.5. Cover that placement line, stitch the tack down, and then trim everything outside the tack down line. I've got that all trimmed. The next thing we're going to do is stitch out the rainbow. The color order they have for this is pomegranate, violet, magic mint, then buttermilk. And when I look at that, I'm thinking the blue color, the magic mint, is going to kind of get lost. And then I also think about the color of a rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So I'm going to change mine around a little bit and put in some green. I am going to start with the color I'm using for pomegranate, which is this color. That'll be my stripe number 1. Stripe number 2, I'm going to change to the yellow, the color I'm using for buttermilk. Stripe number 3, I grabbed one of my greens. I grabbed the color I have for celery. I'm going to stitch that instead of the mint stripe. And then the last stripe, which they have yellow, I went ahead and pulled the color I'm using for the violet. So my rainbow will look a little bit different. The next 4 steps are the rainbow stripes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll go ahead and run all those together. You can pull your colors per the instructions. If you want to change them up, you can change them up. Let's stitch out our rainbow. My rainbow is all stitched out. The next thing we're going to do is switch to cool gray and stitch out the clouds placement lines. we need to place our clouds fabric. We have placement lines here, here, and here. It's a bigger piece. Take a minute, make sure it's covering all of those placement lines, and I'm going to add a piece of tape. Then we'll stitch the tack down and then trim. Got the clouds trimmed. I think I'm going to hold on to this piece. We've got a year's worth of these tiling scenes. You never know when you might need a small piece of fabric. We're going to stitch the decorative outline on our clouds. We're going to switch to the color Buttermilk and stitch the roof satin outline. I've got Buttermilk on the machine to stitch the roof satin outline, and then after that is Magic Mint. For me, it's this light blue to stitch out the raindrops. I'll go ahead and run those two together. This one is done. Let's have a look at it, especially that rainbow. As I'm looking at this, if you haven't started yet, something you might want to think about. The clouds, you could put flexi foam underneath it to make it look puffy. Let's look at the colors. Oh, I like that. I'm really glad that I didn't put the blue here and then I have the blue here, because now I've got 4 different colors here and then I have the blue. I like the way that looks. Make your rainbow however you'd like to make your rainbow. We're going to set this aside. We're going to start on tile number 3. Let's bring up our file for tile number 3. I've got my linen thread on my machine. We're going to go through the same beginning steps, so I'll run everything through the background quilting and then we'll start on our applique together. The quilting is done. I had a thread break around here, which I think is the exact same spot I had a thread break last time. I think what's happening is as it's going into the swirl and then it kind of does a hard stop and goes back around, it's just a little too much for the machine. We're going to stitch out the roof placement line. Grab your roof 3 fabric. This is the biggest piece of roof fabric. It's going to cover about half of this. So make sure you've got your placement lines covered. Tape it, stitch the tack down, and then trim everything outside the tack down lines. That's all trimmed. We're going to get that back on our machine and we're going to stitch out the house fabric placement line. You want to grab your house 3 fabric. That's the piece that's 5.5 by 7. We're going to cover that placement line, which is essentially the other half of this tile. It's interesting, I'm just looking at it. The only quilting you're going to see, I think, is right there, maybe a little bit right there. All the background quilting is getting covered on this one. Add a piece of tape, stitch the tack down, and then trim. Once you have that trimmed, we're going to stitch out the door placement line. You want to grab your door fabric. I grabbed the wrong one. You want the small piece of door fabric, not the bigger piece of door fabric. Cover those placement lines and then tape, stitch the tack down, and trim. Next, we're going to stitch out the windows placement lines. Grab your windows 3 fabric. That's the 4.5 by 5 piece. You want to make sure you're covering all of those placement lines that just stitched out. Add some tape, stitch the tack down, and then trim. Once you have your windows trimmed, you want to switch to cool gray, and we're going to stitch out the house satin outlines. We're going to switch to Buttermilk and stitch out the roof satin outline and details. Lead gray is up next. We're going to use this for the window satin outlines and detail and for the brick fill on the house. They're 2 separate steps on your machine. I'll go ahead and run them together. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the dormer roof fill. And I was looking at the color I pulled for shadow and I really didn't like it. And I was thinking, I want to stitch it in something else. And then I pulled out a picture of the entire project and I see that this matches the top of the chimney and this little bit down here, the foundation of the house. And then I thought, I don't remember stitching the top of the chimney in shadow. That's because I didn't. I stitched it in black, and I know exactly why I stitched it in black. Do you see shadow? 1BLK3, and then black is right above it. That's why I got them confused. You already know this because I'm going to put a note on the screen so nobody makes the same mistake. But looking at this, since I stitched the chimney in black, I'm going to stitch this dormer roof fill in black, and then when we get to this tile down here and we stitch the foundation, I'm going to stitch that in black as well. That way everything is uniform throughout the tiling scene. That's stitched out. It is kind of dark, but I think when it's all put together and we've got the chimney, and then this part will be in black, and the foundation, and then the little sewing machine in the window are all going to be in black, I think it's going to balance out. I do see some gaps in the stitching here and around here, and when I look at my screen I actually see gaps in the stitching right where I see them on my project. I'm going to go with it. I'm going to leave it. Sometimes I go back and I'll double stitch over it and see if I can fill it in. If it really bothers me when it's all put together, since it's black, I can get a Sharpie and fill it in. We're going to switch to the colored linen and stitch out the door satin outline, and after that you would switch to the magic mint. I'll be switching to the light blue and stitch out the raindrop fill. Those are the last two things. I'll go ahead and run them together. This one is done. Let's have a look at it. Very cute. I was right where the quilting is only visible a little bit here and the tiniest bit here. Here's the black stitching, and you can see where I've got some gaps in the stitching. I'm not too worried about it. The overall look for this block kind of reminds me of an old-fashioned home, like a little cottage or something you might see out in the woods, something that's got a little wear and tear on it. I don't think it's going to take away from the project. I'm going to put my linen color back on the machine. We're going to move on to tile 4. Let's bring up tile number 4. Got the linen color on my machine. I'll go ahead and run through the beginning steps through the background quilting, and then we'll pick up with the house placement. That time, instead of the thread breaking here, it broke up here, but it was the exact same point in the design. It goes into the spiral and it hits the corner where it has to stop and then turn and go back the other way. My machine just really isn't liking that. We're going to stitch out the house placement line. We want to place our house 4 fabric. This piece is 3 by 3.5 rectangle. Sometimes I seem to be challenged between squares and rectangles, and I turn the rectangles the wrong way. So let's make sure we lay this down correctly. Cover all those placement lines. This piece is plenty big enough. It's probably big enough even if you lay it down the wrong way. We're going to tack it down and then trim. Once that's trimmed, stitch out your roof placement line. We want to place our roof fabric. It's the piece that's 3.5 by 4. Cover the placement line, tape it in place, tack it down, and trim. Once your roof fabric is trimmed, you want to switch to the color you're using for clover, and we're going to stitch out the tree placement line. We want to grab our tree 4 fabric. This is the one that's 4 by 5 inches. Make sure we cover those placement lines, and I'm going to pull this off and take some extra time placing my fabric. You can see it's got stripes. I want to make sure that I lay it down nice and straight and that it's not cockeyed. That's ready to go. You want to tack it down and trim. Once that's trimmed, you can stitch your tree decorative outline. Switch to the color timber, and we're going to stitch out the trunk placement line. You want to grab your trunk 4 fabric. It's the piece that's 3 by 4 inches. Cover that placement line, stitch the tack down, and trim. Next, we're going to stitch the trunk decorative outlines. Switch to cool gray. We're going to stitch out the house satin outline. Going to switch to buttermilk. We're going to stitch the roof outline and details. Next we're switching to lead gray for the bricks fill, and then after that, if you're using Magic Mint, I'm using light blue for the raindrops. I'll go ahead and run those two together. This one is all done. Everything looks good. I did have a jump thread right there. I'm going to take this off my machine and we're going to start on tile number 5. We're on tile number 5, and if anyone's curious, I'm splitting this project over a couple of days, so I'm on day 2 for this. I do think you could do all 6 tiles in one day. It's just kind of a lot, so I split it over a few days. Here's tile 5, set embroidery. I've got my linen color thread on the machine. Again, the first steps are all the same. I'll go ahead and run through those to music. Quite a few thread breaks. Not sure what's going on with that, but we're going to start with our house placement line. We're using the color linen. We want to grab our house 5 fabric. This is the 4x7 piece. I'm going to go ahead and place that. Make sure you cover all those lines. Tape it, tack it down, and trim. Next is our door placement line. We need to place our door fabric. This is the fabric they have shown, and you can see it's got a print, and here's the top part of the door. I can kind of try and match it up if I want to, but I need to remember I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can sort of line it up and grab your next piece, and then you can sort of sit and fuss with it. I'm going to put this on my lap and see if I can manage to get it to match. I think I have it close to the right spot. Let's stitch the tack down and then line them up and see if I got it. But I'm just going to fold and lay it down and see how I did. I don't think I got it exact, but I think I did a pretty good job of that. I want to go ahead and trim the extra and then put this back on the machine, and we're going to stitch the window placement line. Grab that window fabric. I'm going to cover that, tape it, tack it down, and trim. Next is the grass fabric placement line. We want to grab our grass 5 fabric. That's the 3.5x8 piece, so skinnier piece. Place that, tack it down, and trim. We want to switch to cool gray and stitch out the house satin outline. Next we're going to stitch out our sewing machine. I am going to stitch it in black, which is how it's listed in the instructions, but you can stitch your sewing machine any color you want. If you want to have a pink one, a purple one, a red one, pick whatever color thread you want, put that on and stitch out the sewing machine. Once the sewing machine has stitched, we're going to switch to lead gray. We're going to stitch out the windows, satin, outline, and details, and the bricks fill. They're 2 separate steps on your embroidery machine, but I'm going to go ahead and run them together. Looks like we've got a jump thread here between our bricks. If you've got that, you can snip it now or get it later. And then we're going to switch to linen and stitch out the door satin outline. The next step is stitching out the foundation. I have to do that in black because I made a mistake with my thread color, but if you did it right, you're using the color shadow. So I'm going to switch my thread and we'll stitch out the foundation. Next we're going to switch to celery and stitch out the grass fill. That looks nice. That really breaks up the little band of dark right here. It's a good thing they don't have an HOA that makes them use the edge trimmer. We're going to switch to black and stitch out the doorknob, and then after that to brown, they're calling it timber, and stitch out the umbrella handle fills. I'm going to run these 2 steps together. We want to switch to pink lemonade. We're going to stitch out our umbrella placement line. I've got my felt for the umbrella. If you're not using the felt, you can use fabric. Use whatever you've got. We're going to go ahead and place that there. Let's go ahead and tape this, stitch the tack down, and trim. Here's the umbrella. You can actually see through this felt. If you have embroidery leather, you could use that as well. It's just a raw edge applique, or maybe double the felt. I'm not sure if you can put Fusible on the back of felt. I don't think you can because I think you'll burn the felt. I'm going to put this back on my machine, switch to linen, and we're going to stitch out the little dots on the umbrella. Going to switch to violet and stitch out the bottom of the boot and the top boot fill. Mine has a jump thread right there. I'm going to take a second to cut that off, and then we're going to switch to clover, and we're going to stitch out the leaves and stems fill on the flower. Switch to pomegranate, and we're going to leave this color on for the rest of this stitch out. We're going to start with the flowers on the petals we just stitched, and then after that the placement line for the rain boots. It's two separate steps, but I'll go ahead and run those together. We're going to use our micro velvet for the boots. It tells us to lay down the micro velvet right side up with the nap running horizontally, so running down. Well, I didn't cut mine like that. There's the nap. This is running down. Let's see if it'll fit. It will fit. So no matter which direction you cut it, even though it's a rectangle, you can fix it so the nap is running down. That's good. I didn't want to have to cut another piece. You want to cover the placement lines. I'm going to get tape and tape in a few different spots, and then we'll stitch the tack down. This slides, just so you know. I taped it on two sides. That is not sufficient. We want to remove the tape and trim. There's not going to be any decorative stitching. It's that raw edge applique again, so take a little bit of extra time as you're trimming. You also want to look when you go to trim. There's a jump thread on mine, so you're going to have to get rid of that thread. That way you can trim in between the little boots. The last thing we're going to stitch is the rain boot detail. If you don't have this micro velvet, I think this would look really good in an embroidery leather or in fabric with iron-on clear vinyl on top. It will make it look shiny and slick. Let's stitch out those details. It says we're all done. Let's get a look at those boots. I stitched out some of the detail here at the top, and it looks like right here and right here. I kind of wished this would have an outline on it, maybe a little more detail here and here, but it's going to look good. Nobody's going to get this close to it like I do when I'm filming. So this one is done. I'm going to get my next 5x7 hoop ready, and we're going to work on our last tile, tile number 6. That's the one that has the goose. We're on our last tile, tile number 6. Let's go ahead and bring up the tile file for tile number 6. Same thing as before, I've got the linen color on my machine. I'm going to run it through the first few steps through the background quilting. We're going to start with the house placement line. Grab your last piece of house fabric, cover the placement line, tape it, tack it down, and trim. We have a special guest appearance today. This is Jacqueline. She's my dog who has dementia. She's almost completely blind, barely has any hearing left, and requires a lot of care. She's the reason why everything takes 3 times as long to do, because she needs to go out and go to the bathroom a lot. Say hi to everybody, Jacqueline. Hi! Let's get back to our project. That's all trimmed. We're going to switch to clover. We're going to work on the tree. Since we're getting near the end and the steps are really repetitive at this point, I'm going to start running a couple things together. So switch to clover. You'll do the placement line for your tree fabric, place the fabric, tack it down, and trim. Once that's trimmed, stitch the decorative outline. We're going to switch to timber, stitch out the trunk placement line, tack down the trunk fabric, trim that, and then stitch the trunk decorative outline. Switch to cool gray and stitch out the house satin outline. Switch to celery. We're going to do the grass. So you'll stitch the placement line, place your fabric, tack it down, and then trim, then stitch out the decorative grass detail. Switch to lead gray. We've got one little brick to stitch out. We're going to stitch out the flowers next. We're going to use colors clover, violet, and buttermilk. I'm going to run these steps together. We're just going to be switching threads. The clover is for the stems and leaves. The violet is for the petals, and then the buttermilk is for the center fill on the flowers. I just had my needle break. I don't think I've ever had that happen before on my embroidery machine. We're stitching out the yellow flower center fills. I'm going to go ahead and switch to an 8012 super non-stick needle. A little more heavy duty than the 7511. I'm hoping I'll be able to find the tip of that. Got the bigger needle on my machine, rethreaded. I backed up to the beginning of the yellow. Just looks like there's a lot of overlapping stitches here. I'm hoping the rest of this stitch out goes okay. We're really close to finishing. That stitched out much better. We're going to switch to the color Tawny, and we're going to stitch out the goose. Next, we're going to stitch out the little bunny ears that the goose is wearing. The inner ears are in linen, and then the outer ears are in pink lemonade. I'll go ahead and run those two steps together. Switch to linen and stitch out the goose placement line. We're going to place our goose fabric. I'm using a white flannel. You can use regular white fabric. I don't think I would use embroidery leather. It looks like there's going to be a decorative stitch. If you want to make your goose look a little chubby, you can put some flexi foam underneath or a little layer of batting. I'm going to cover that line, tape it, and stitch the tack down. Going to trim everything outside of the tack down line, and there is a decorative stitch, so Mr. Goose, Mrs. Goose is going to have a nice decorative outline. We want to switch to the color Tawny and stitch out the goose beak. Next, we're going to switch to violet to stitch out the ribbon detail. And then the last step is the eye, which they have using the color shadow. And since I haven't used the color shadow at all throughout, and I've been using black instead, I'm going to stitch the eye in black. I'm going to run these two together. All done. Let's have a look here. Very cute. Love the fuzzy goose. You know, everybody who sees this is going to look at it and go, ooh, and rub the goose's belly. It's probably going to end up with like little finger marks on the belly. We're going to set this aside. We need to trim and assemble. And if you've bought the embellishment kit, we're also going to work on making the little mini quilts. I want to put together the mini quilt before I sew the panels together. I also want to make the hanging sleeve. That way I've got all the parts ready. In the instructions, it has us layering the quilts on the project batting and then sewing along the lines and then putting the backing on it, leaving an opening, sewing almost all the way around, and then flipping it right side up and hand stitching closed. I know if I do this, it is not going to look good. I am not good at hand stitching things closed. I generally will put them on my sewing machine. I just don't think it's going to turn out well. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got the backing and the batting, and then we have our top. I'm going to treat this like a quilt. I am going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch along these lines. Here, 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 and here. And then I picked out my fabric for my binding. This is a Flower House Basic. I think this is going to look really good. I have some strips here. They're about 1.5 inches wide. I'm thinking I can press these 1.5 inch strips, sew them to the back, flip them to the front, and bind it like a regular quilt. It's not perfect. It's kind of crooked, but it's really cute. There you go. Mini quilt with binding. I think I actually missed some of it right there. That's okay. Trying to get around the tiny little corners and do the little folding to make them mitered corners was really hard. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to work on the hanging sleeve. We're on day 3 in case anyone's keeping track. The mini quilt's done. I'm going to set this aside. At this point, I thought I had a good idea for a different way to make the hanging sleeve, so I skipped that part right now and I'll move on to trimming the blocks. I'm going to tell you that you want to follow the instructions. It's going to be a lot easier. You'll get to see what I end up doing, and it does work, but it really is easier just to follow their instructions. We need to trim all of these. It tells us in the instructions to trim on the line we stitched in step 10, which is the background tack down and trimming line. Got my ruler out to measure because I thought that they would fit the orange pop rulers, and they don't. This is 5 inches gosh, like maybe a thread under 5, depends how you line up your ruler. So 5 inches this way and 6 3/4 inches the other way. When you go to cut these, grab a ruler, cut on the line, be careful. There's no easy, like quick way to cut it. None of the orange pop rulers fit. I would just line up your ruler and then cut. And I didn't cut very straight. This is something where I'm going to do this one on camera, and then I think I'll do the rest off camera. I need to get my readers on, and I need to get a little closer to the project, which is hard to do with the tripod right here. So I would say just line up your ruler on the threads, take your time. It does shift. Your ruler is going to shift because you've got the applique and the embroidery, so you really want to push down. I even have the little non-skid things. These are Creative Grids rulers. They have the texture on the back. You just have to decide, I guess, how picky you want to be. When you go to trim the next side, you can line up your ruler along the straight edge that you just cut, and then look for that thread to cut the stitch line. Let's see if I do better on this side. I can tell right away that these are not going to be cut perfectly. Just do the best that you can. That side's better. Use that straight edge, line that up, look for the thread, line that up. And then let's line up the next side. So here's my first one. See how there's no thread here? And then as you go down, you can see some of the thread, some of the thread, some of the thread, and then it kind of disappears again. Wherever there's no applique or stitching, it's easier to get a perfectly straight cut, because what happens with your ruler when you're sitting it down on stuff like this, it kind of wobbles a little bit. You have to just hold it down to the best of your ability, put some pressure on it, and try and squish your block to get your straight cut. I'll go ahead and trim the rest of these off camera, and then we'll start putting our blocks together. I've got everything trimmed on the top of page 34. And then on the bottom of page 35, there's some details about how to line up, how to sew, basting stitches, back stitches, which line is which. Look at that, decide if it's useful for you. I know Kimberbell has also been doing a series of lunch and learns. I did watch the first one, and she talks about different ways of putting it together, even using glue. I'm not going to use glue. I'm going to try and make this as easy on myself as possible. And I've already done a tiling seam with the Snow Place Like Home tiling seam from the Bella box. This is how I think I'm going to do this. The reason I want to do this is because of these two right here. Look at all these lines that we have to try and line up. There's a lot right here to line up. This to me is probably the most difficult two to sew together, so I'm going to start with these two. This ended up taking me 3 or 4 tries to do and having the seam rip. What ended up working the best was using pins and a basting stitch, then checking to make sure everything lined up, then putting the final seam with the smaller stitch length in. I'm going to have a picture popping up on the screen to show you. The reason I'm moving this along is because it was about 40 minutes of footage. That's way too long. So I tried clips, not using a basting stitch, using a basting stitch, and then the pins with the basting stitch gave me the best results. Let's have a look. Are you ready? Kind of nervous here. Oh, look at that. Yay! That's much better. Pins for the win. Let's look at this one together. All we have is this one seam, and I have one pin in my hand, so that works. So we're going to match that up, lay it on top of each other, try and get them to match. Stick in the pin. That should be good. What I'll do is run over this part, open it, make sure it looks good, and then do the rest of the seam. And then I'll do that here as well, because there's only one part to match. So I'll match it, stitch here, open it, make sure that looks good, then put it together, stitch the whole seam. And then here, I'm going to pin here and here with the tree, and then with the trunk. And then I'll just stitch over those parts, open it, make sure it looks good, and then stitch. This one's by far going to be your most difficult seam. Let's pretend that these are sewn together. You've got one seam to match here, and then of course you'll have your seam here. Here, just one, and then your seams. And here, just the grass. If you can get this one done and looking good, I think the rest of it's going to go really well. I'm going to go ahead and do all of that off camera. Here's everything put together. I went ahead and pressed all the seams open. There are some parts that don't line up exactly. Right here, that's just a little bit off. Let's see, it looks like this seam is a little bit off. The grass looks really good. This part looks really good. There are just some minor areas that don't line up perfectly, but for me, I'm okay with this. This is going to be on display, and if anybody says, oh look, that's crooked, I'll say, oh look, there's my door. See you later, right? It's going to look cute. Don't worry about it. Now we need to put everything together. I grabbed a piece of scrap batting. This is Hobbs 80/20, so it's got a bit of poof to it. I have some of this Blossom by Christopher Thompson Riley Blake fabric. It's extra wide back from the cutoff of one of my quilts. I use some 505 basting spray. I spray the batting and then I lay the fabric down and iron it. These two layers are stuck together. They're not going anywhere. And what's interesting about this project is there's no stitch in the ditch. It tells us to put it like this and then to run a basting stitch, to use safety pins or method of choice, and then trim the extra. I can't see the point of running a basting stitch around it. I've got this attached pretty well with the 505. So what I'm going to do is spray some 505 on the batting and lay down my tiling seam and just give it a push, and the fabric should adhere to the 505. Here's what it looks like. Generally you want to do this in a well ventilated area. I've got a window here that I'm going to open as soon as the trash truck finishes driving around the neighborhood. It's making a lot of noise. Light spray, not too close. That looks good. Let's grab our quilts, put it on top, press it. Looking good. Get it nice and flat, straightened out. So that's all pressed down. Yep, look at that. That worked really well. Now I want to trim it, and we're going to bind it, but we also need to do the hanging sleeve. To trim this, I'm going to get one of my longer rulers. Going to line up one of the lines on the ruler with the seam on the quilt. It's going to feel, it's really straight. Let's go ahead and trim that. Nice. You can see not a lot got trimmed off, just a little bit. We'll go all the way around. I'm going to be using the Kimberbell display stand for this. You want to follow the instructions for the hanging sleeve. My idea really didn't work. As you can see here, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make it work, and in the end, I went back and ended up making stuff that looked just like they have in the instructions. So follow the instructions for this step. It'll be a lot easier. And you make this before you actually attach your backing. That way everything fits and you don't have to peel the backing away, which is what I ended up having to do. But in the end, I measured it and I made it work, and we're going to move on to the next step. Those are stitched down here and here. That. And, oh, I may have put them too close together. Unscrew. There you go. Like that. Very good. Great height. You're actually going to see a little bit of the wood base. That's going to work. Wow. Lesson learned. Follow the instructions. I'm going to put the binding on, and I'll be using that Flower House Basics. This one here. I machine bind. I will go ahead and put a video down there for you. The binding is on. I'm going to show you some stuff on the front, and then we'll put on our mini quilt. When I brought my binding around to the front, it covered up this part of the house, a little bit of the umbrella, some of the cloud up here at the top, some of this rainbow detail. I think what I'm going to do for the next mini quilt is any part of the tile that's on the outside, I'm going to leave it like long when I trim everything, and then measure before I do my binding. Because my binding here, the way I do binding, I use 2.5 inch strips. It takes up about a 1/2 inch here. So I actually need a 1/2 inch extra, not a 1/4 inch on the outside, to prevent the binding strip from covering any of the design. Next, we have to put on our mini quilt. It says hand tack the design. You know what that means. That means glue gun. It shows it hand tacked here and here up on the tree. My mini quilt's a little bit bigger because I did the binding. That's funny. I have a little bit extra right there. I can feel it, and right there. I'm looking at how it fits on the picture. This flower underneath doesn't get covered at all, and mine's getting really covered. So let's just play with it. I'm probably going to move mine. I know I want mine on this part of the tree. Just put a little glue. I'm going to twist to get that little twist that they show in the picture, and then press that down. I'm using what's called a cool shot glue gun. I'll show that to you in case you haven't seen that in my videos before. It is a hot glue gun, but it's not scorching hot. I have a high temperature glue gun that absolutely 100% will burn your fingers. This is not as hot, but it works just as well, especially for things with fabric, felt, lace. That's what it's designed for, paper crafting. This is the glue gun. That looks good there. And then I have to figure out where it's going to go here. Right there. So mine's going in a bit of a different spot because I put the binding on the mini quilt. It made it bigger, so it needs to hang up a little bit higher. Now I'm okay with that, but again, that's something to think about as you're making your mini quilt. If you like the binding, it can't hang quite as low because it's a little bit bigger, or you can make skinnier binding. Let's have a look. Looks good. What do you think? Do you think it matters that it's tacked up a little bit higher? I don't. I like the way that it looks where it is. Not worried that my mini quilt is a little bit bigger. Here it is on the display stand in my sewing room. Looking good. Very nice. I'm going to have to find somewhere to set that up. Let's go in and have a look at this. Sorry if it's wobbly. I'm just holding the camera. Looks good. Nice detail. The quilting looks good. It matches up really nice here on the seam. I like the colors I picked for my rainbow. Let's go down and look at the mini quilt. Really cute. Love it. I actually really like it with that binding. The binding color I picked goes really well with the goose and the boots and the umbrella. Very cute. I can see the flower. I didn't cover it up. For the most part, the seams match. The one that I do next month, I am going to leave some extra on the outside so I don't accidentally catch any of the design like I did here and up here with the house. Very cute. Let me know if you're making these, if you use your own fabrics. Did you buy a kit? What do you think? How did yours turn out? When you go to display it, don't put it on a crooked TV tray. Mine's kind of cockeyed. We'll work on one of these each month. So for this month, which is March, we've completed the April mini quilt. In April, we'll work on and complete the May mini quilt. I'll do the same thing next month. I'll give you 2 videos, one where we go through and we look at the design, we pick our fabrics, we pick our thread colors, and then the second video will be like this where we put the whole thing together. I think for the next video, I'll move through some of the basics a little bit faster. All of these are going to have the background quilting, and we're going to do applique in the same manner, so some of the steps we can do a little bit faster and it'll make for a shorter video. Let me know what you think of my home sewn April mini quilt. Let me know if you're making these as well, how yours turned out. If you haven't gotten started yet, if you found the video helpful, I'd love to know. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Join my Facebook group, the link is below. If you decided to stitch along with the home sewn mini quilts and you haven't yet purchased your products, please consider using my links below. I've got a lot of fun Kimberbell and quilting and all sorts of stuff planned out. It's going to be a really busy month. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.